Hello, gentlemen.
Hi.
How have you been, Rustom? I keep up with all your work and your writing.
I got COVID in late May and I had no symptoms. So I quarantined for 14 days and I thought I was okay. So I took another test after 14 days. I tested positive again. And that kind of threw me a little bit. But then friends said, wait a bit and, take the test later. So I'm taking the test tomorrow.
Do you feel okay?
Completely okay.
No
But
exhaustion, nothing.
no, I've been working quite hard. And
Touch
what can I say? It's a bit strange. Poor Nikhil has been going through in his own family, there's been a bit of a challenge. And
really?
Yeah, with long haul COVID, which is something new that the doctors are still discovering and understanding themselves. So it's a lot of gray area and uncertainty all the time, but it's very scary. And it's definitely a reminder that we still need to keep very, very careful.
Ever since March of 2020, the number of deaths we've suffered personally, it's just been unending grief. Initially, young students were quite excited because they are quite familiar with the digital space. And so doing theatre online was not terrible. As the days grew into months, into more than a year, the depression started setting in. With kids who are feeling that they're losing their teen years and they're missing out on this. And there's no escape, right? There's no friends, there's nothing. So if there's a bad scene at home, you're stuck with the bad scene at home.
Yeah, right.
One, of course, is this whole lockdown and isolation that you referred to. On the other hand, while you're recovering, there's another kind of depression, apparently, which kind of takes over. And the social milieu was not familiar with this kind of a conversation. And there's another dimension I feel to this. When you say no escape, if you're looking at the platform or the medium across which we are engaging, it's incredibly binding. The oppressiveness of focus or this pressure of being productive or making sense, there is hardly any space for silence or very little scope for meandering around to struggle to articulate something. There's such a huge pressure we end up creating on ourselves. And imagine these young students who are expected to learn a skill or a craft. The pressure is actually unimaginable.
Yes. Yeah.
Rustom, thank you for your suggestion. I think it simplifies things considerably. Just to kind of remind ourselves, the first question is about what you've been doing. First wave, second wave, whatever you'd like to talk about. The second question is pertaining to space. It's very interesting. Kirtana, you and Nikhil both run spaces, and Rustom does want to talk about a few spaces himself. And then finally, we'll move to the third question, as Rustom has put, as to the new form of theatre. Is there going to be a new form of theatre? What kind of hybrid are we looking at?
I think all three are quite marvelous. So I'm quite happy.
I think so too.
I have had an extremely productive time. And sometimes I feel quite ashamed to say that because everybody is about, you need to introspect, or this is a quiet time. But it's been an unbelievably, I just feel like I landed at the start. It began with disappointment, let me say, because I was in Bombay and I was directing Rhinoceros for Drama School Mumbai. And 10 days before opening night, we had to take this sort of emergency meeting and basically box the production, literally pack up our sets, our masks, our costumes, everything. And I flew back to Bangalore. Now, in March of 2020, it was as yet, we didn't know, we had no idea how this was going to go. And we didn't anticipate the sudden lockdown and the migrant crisis that followed. So in March of 2020, I came back and I instantly began wondering what was going to happen with young people, and especially what was going to happen with teachers who'd suddenly have to work online. So quite soon we organized, in June of 2020, we organized a symposium on theater pedagogies in the time of Zoom. And this was a national symposium, and basically people were looking at new strategies and how we were. So that's how I landed. And then I did not stop. And then there were things that were, for me, very personal and really without agenda, without money, without an audience, because I was moving into a digital space and I had no idea whether I was going to have an audience at all. And one of the projects that I've continued was actually an attempt, maybe a naive attempt on my part, but to embrace my tribe of actors. So I did a project which was basically 50 actors reading from Sri Aurobindo's Savitri. And it's an oral theater project. So it's online, it's digital, it's on YouTube and Instagram. And basically I would send extracts of text because I was interested in these questions of life and death during a pandemic. So I sent them to actors and I said, if you would record it and send it back to me with images that are resonant, I'll edit them. This was the next. And then it didn't stop, Siddharth, because then I was off in Germany for 2 months and I was curating a festival there. Then came this digital archive called Nagama's Letters. So, I really was busy, and I really felt also that I had been unhappy with the way, with sort of proscenium theater and the way in the country, just the gatekeeping and just the way that theater was happening. I was personally not thinking it was inspiring for me. So this was a really good time to explore a new space and really wider audiences, think about why I'm doing theater yet again, not the same old, like do a production, play to 200 people. It just changed. My bearings changed.
You've been making films any which way, right? You've been a filmmaker already.
Yeah.
What really was different over here now in this particular scenario?
Couple of things. One was it wasn't filmmaking. So I wasn't going out and shooting anything. It was really a process of editing. So it was a process of listening to people's voices and really hearing. You could hear, even now when I listen to them, some voices were fearful, some voices were embracing. Because there's nothing to distract you. It's just the bare naked text and it's a person's voice. So they're really vulnerable. So sometimes, and in some voices, I could hear a lack of understanding of the text, but this too was beautiful for me because it wasn't a know-it-all sort of, it was just a kind of exploration, where are we, what's happening, and who am I in my voice? Who am I?
When you say the text, Kirtana, do you mean Savitri? Are you referring to the Savitri?
Especially because of the pandemic, the connection to the pandemic and life and death.
That's a very powerful choice.
Very powerful, yes. And another thing, Rustom, you may be interested because it was an open call, so it was not curated. But I also sense that people did not want to engage with the text. It would be kind to say they didn't want to engage because it was complex text. But I think for some, it was also because it was a Hindu text. Yes. I think there was a sort of a sense that, this is not secular. And that for me was also interesting.
Very much so. Very much so. I was asked because I'm working on the Mahabharata at the moment in Singapore. So I was asked to give a little talk to the actors on the context, and inevitably that word religion comes in. Now, what is religion, as you know, and I raised the same question, what is Hindu? It is Hindu, but how do we interpret that word Hindu, in today's world in the context that we're living in? And those are deep questions, they're rich, yeah. Now I can imagine that's a very rich way of discovering new things in the theater through voice and reading people's vulnerabilities through the voice, where are they at this point in time? It's very beautiful.
And also just not knowing your audience.
If you look at the form, you're looking at poetry, which itself, if I can take the liberty, is born out of images and then it is put in text. And here you're calling out where you're asking participants to kind of bring in their own images.
If they had a lot didn't send me images. But by this time, I was so taken with the walks of migrant labor across the country. So my first, maybe 15, I have 38 videos up right now. But I think the first 15 or so was only images of people walking.
Okay.
So that was the juxtaposition for me.
Very
The,
beautiful.
just images of going back to love, returning to home. Because that was Savitri's walk, and that was Savitri's debate with Yama, was really about, I will go with you wherever, but I will seek love, and in life is love. So,
yeah.
And interestingly, later, initially it was just, this sort of me creating the images. But later, the last 4 have been remembrances of sorts, because I lost my father in September 2020. We lost a very dear friend, Agnes. We just kept losing people nonstop. So I think the last 4 or 5 have been remembrance videos.
I've been working towards my space BlackBoxOkhla for the last several years, since 2014. But we had our official first season, 2019 to 2020. And obviously, like Kirtana said, it was devastating to just shut it down after our first season, when we had a complete second season almost lined up, and we were really working towards something that I was super passionate about, and felt like we were really accomplishing what we had set out to do with the space. When we shut down, we tried to move a lot of the things online, and I think I was very excited by the pre-recorded shows that we were able to see online for the first time, and the democratization of theater that for so many decades and centuries has been limited to little pockets of New York's Broadway or London's West End, and complete inaccessibility to us in the global South to a lot of those shows. I was quite excited to see that was happening. And I'm excited that continues, but I was very much, and still am, have very conflicting views about plays on Zoom or plays for the virtual medium. Personally, I kept developing work like Kirtana. I jumped in. I was working on a TV show. I was working on 2 theater pieces, and things were going really well. I think, like Rustom was talking about yesterday, things really shifted after the second wave for me. Personally, obviously, it hit us at home pretty badly. And there was this month where it really felt like we were living through so much grief every day at home. There was 2-3 weeks where there was someone at home, either one of my parents or my brother, someone was attending a chotha or a prayer service on Zoom. Every day it was happening in the evening. Something shifted over there. And you're catching me at that moment of that shift where I'm still not sure what it is, and I'm still trying to articulate it for myself. But a lot of that engagement and excitement of keep going, we will be able to open some point, has changed. It's not there anymore. And I was actually apprehensive when you got in touch with us about this talk, because I was feeling so unsure about exactly how to articulate what I'm feeling right now, because I don't know when we can open. I don't know. And I have a lot of anger that the global North is opening. And I don't know if you've heard, but Springsteen on Broadway was the first Broadway show to open. And it opened in June, and they've only allowed people with FDA-approved vaccines to see the show, which means all of us sitting here in India will not have access to that show and will not be able to watch it. And I don't know what the future of these kind of protocols will be there, but there's definitely a lot of anger. I don't know when we can open our space again. People ask me this all the time, because I'm managing a space. So I understand, I'm excited, I want to open. But the uncertainty after the second wave has led to confusion and anger. And I'm in so many different moods and emotions right now. I was really apprehensive to get into this conversation because of that, because I didn't know what to say. And I also didn't want to be repetitive. I feel like so many people in the theater, so many people like us are in similar boats. And especially people like me who've invested in the idea of space. I passionately believe in space. I believe what we need, what performers, actors, directors, what artists working in the theater need is time and space. We need to renegotiate our ideas of how we deal with space, how we deal with presence, how we deal with community, being together, and all those things being thrown into this big jumble is confusing, to say the least. So this is where I am right now, post second wave. Post first wave, we had still kept planning the season, but post second wave, I'm not planning anything. I have completely stopped, and yeah, that's where I am.
Thanks, Nikhil. You're really addressing this moment, and I share this moment with you. I mean, we all do. I'm feeling very uncertain. Now, you very interestingly raised the whole dynamics of travel, because there's a huge discrimination at work in this larger vaccine culture that we're living with, and there are a lot of protocols and disparities. So indeed, if we have been, we've received the Covishield vaccine, that's not the best of news. It may not enable us to cross certain borders, even though Covishield is AstraZeneca produced in India. So there are all these new kinds of discriminations that I think people, and I'm glad you've mentioned the Global South, so we broaden our perspective a little bit. We're going to face, I think, a lot of trouble in the future. It's not going to be easy. I'm working on the Mahabharat in Singapore. It was supposed to open this year. Hopefully it'll open next year. I don't believe I'll be able to enter the country. I missed the first workshop, and I think I'm going to miss the second workshop. So there are all these real setbacks. We had planned certain things, and I was such a nomadic kind of creature, but all of that has come grinding to a halt. So yes, it is a moment of deep uncertainty for me. And there is anger and there is fear. I think those are the two things, emotions that are very prevalent, I think, in today's time, even if we may not fully acknowledge it. There's a big difference for me between the first phase and the second wave, and I'm interested, why do we say first phase, second wave? I don't know how these words come about. The first phase, as you know, many of you know, I produced this video lecture, 9 episodes. I've never been, it just happened. It's not something I thought about. So I do believe there was some kind of a creative energy in that, which is something that Kirtana was talking about, suddenly an upsurge of energy that I got. And I found myself thinking about the relationship between theater and the coronavirus in many different ways, going back to the Elizabethan play, going back to the Spanish flu, where absurdly, and crazily, the Spanish flu was a lot worse than anything we are experiencing now. And yet, theaters remained open in Calcutta, in Bombay, in London, in New York. And it was devastating. So there's a different mindset over there. Obviously, we're at a very different point in time. So I began to think about all these things, social distancing, public assemblies, Black Lives Matter, because it's interesting that even as, the pandemic was happening and theaters shut down, but that didn't stop people from going to the streets and performing on the streets, performing politics on the streets, as in the CAA, the Citizenship Amendment Act, later the Farmers Movement. So we're seeing many different kinds of, on the one hand, no performance at one point in time in the way we understand performance, but another kind of performative energy is being unleashed. I find that interesting. So I produced that in the first phase. And then in the second wave, suddenly I was hit by all the things that you're talking about, which is primarily death. I've never experienced this reality of so many people dying at the same time. That people say is a very real manifestation of any pandemic. People die like flies, that horrible expression. And that's what, in a sense, we are dealing with. Families are dying, entire families. And so death has definitely hit me very hard. I've also been hit by what I think is the inability to mourn, because the rituals have been disrupted. So even coming together, as we would do in an Indian context, has become increasingly more difficult, and we're resorting to virtual technologies to grieve. But how far can our grief go, in this? So I'm dealing with all these issues. And at the moment, I think I only have one choice in life, and that is to write. And to write about these things is not going to be simple, but that's what I think I'm going to be doing in the next week. And hopefully I will be negative at some point in time. But that's where I am at the moment.
Something that both Nikhil as well as Rustom said that just so resonated with me. And this was the AIDS epidemic. I happened to be in 1987, 89 or so. I was living in Los Angeles, and I was working at the Los Angeles Theater Center. I was training there and working there. And this was in the height of the AIDS epidemic. There was a qualitative difference. There was a kind of rebellious undertow, There was so much moralism attached to it. So because of that, the artist community responded rebelliously, and there was a huge pushback. One of the spaces that I had the opportunity to perform in was called Highways, and it was an LGBTQ space, and the entire courtyard had the outlines of bodies of people who had died. So we were performing on top of these shapes, but there was such a there was a feeling that death is not the end of us, and no one is going to mess with our lifestyle. Nobody is going to stop us from creating. I find that somehow with this virus, it's different, because this virus has also given people a sense of hopelessness. So I wonder whether it's coming on the back of everything else that capitalism has brought to the world, and the kind of alienation, isolation. So I'm wondering whether it's come on the back of all of that, because we're engaging in a completely different fashion.
Yes, absolutely. Well, we are dealing with political authoritarianism across the world in very, very virulent ways. Not that it wasn't there earlier.
I think it's also deeply revealing inequities in the world, which is what is definitely sparking most of the anger. The inequities were always there from the beginning, but they've just got worse and worse and more obvious and more obvious. And sometimes when we talk about intercultural work, I always believed the best result of intercultural work was when it revealed subliminal inequities that were hidden. And when two communities, two cultures came together, they came to the surface in the act of performing. And I wonder what happened to intercultural performances now that inequities are so blatant and so on the surface.
It's changed the nature of dramaturgy altogether, because now the global north is no more in a position, even if you look at the way the idea of dramaturgy was constructed through a Western lens, and you look at where we are today, it's changed forever. I mean, whatever Rustom wrote all those many years ago is now, it's common parlance. We will all be making artistic decisions with this guiding us. The only issue still remains white money. The issue is still that the funds are coming from, and especially now where the creative community has been so battered.
I think we also have to think about some more planetary kinds of issues which go beyond the global, and which is what preoccupied certainly me for a long time. But today, when you think about climate change and how it is manifesting itself in almost every single part of the globe, including our own country, in such virulent ways, I think this is another reason why we are vulnerable. We are vulnerable because on the one hand, the proponents of global capitalism, of corporate culture, will not want to take heed of this reality, which is really has already destroyed the planet in so many, has already destroyed millions and millions of species. I think one of the questions is, what does a theater do about this? How does a theater position itself in relation to climate change? It's a very, very large question. But I think if we tried, and maybe this could also be a way of bringing in space, because I think one crucial practical area, let's be a bit practical, is energy conservation. Like if I believe, Kirtana, you're in a very alternative space, it's in a rural area. And, I think theater has been, the established theaters at least, have been very wasteful in terms of energy, and they almost made a privilege out of it. There was a production of the Bacchae done in the Schaubühne in the 70s, which at that point in time had wowed me because the director had used 100,000 watts of neon lights. And today I would say, what an absurd, ridiculous way of trying to do something different. That's just waste, There's something obscene about that. I don't even think it's particularly aesthetic, but I do feel the pandemic has compelled us to be more mindful about energy, And yes, we've been very concerned in the theatre with our personal energy, but now we have to think of energy in a somewhat different, more material, in a more ecological kind of direction. And I would also end by saying that it has made us mindful about breath. This has been one of my takeaways from the pandemic. Of course, in the theatre, we've all been preoccupied with breathing. We think breath is at the source of energy. Breath enables you to transform a character. Breath enables you to change the energies, the expressions on your face and all of that. But what the pandemic has opened up is something I've never thought about earlier. And I acknowledge it in my lectures, that it's the social dimensions of breath. It's the fact that when we are in a space, it's not just the actors who are breathing, we are breathing in that auditorium or in that performance space. So how do we then find new theatrical spaces which can breathe, instead of being, in a sense, boxed? And I think this is a very, it's an architectural question, really. I think, Siddharth, you would be, how do we find spaces that breathe, and, so that we extend our own kind of consciousness about breath at a psychophysical level into a more social, into a more political, into a more ecological dimension.
I think, Rustom, you really wonderfully extended the entire dimension of the conversation, going from political to ecological, and then coming to this question of how do you build, coming to the very concrete aspect of our existence. And I can see where Kirtana is right now. I think she's done some bits right, because I don't see any concrete where she's sitting.
That's right. So, you can see the big cracks as well.
Yeah, but that's okay. That's the building moving. That's the building accommodating all the forces. Yeah, that's not a problem. Yeah. But yeah, if Kirtana, you can talk about your place and how you went about making it and locating it.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, whatever Rustom said is in spades. So the reason also why for me this has been such a seminal time, the lockdown and the pandemic, is because it really forced us to put our money where our mouths were. Because this is something Konarak and I have always, we've always felt, both of us are very farm type people and close to nature and animals. Many years ago, 16 years ago actually, when we had a tiny little bit of money, we did not do anything practical. We bought a piece of land outside Bangalore. And for the longest time, we lived like gentlemen farmers. You live in town and you're working in town, and all your money and resources is going to look after the care for all the animals that my daughter accumulates in all of this. But at the start of the lockdown, it hit us in a very real way. The family who've lived here and taken care of the farm for us for all these many years, they were going back to Andhra. So instant overnight decision, okay, fine, we will take care of them. We'll drop them near the border, all of that. But this means we have to actually live on the farm, take care of it, plow the fields, take care of the animals, and so on and so forth. This was, again, our daughter made the decision for us. But we've been here since March of 2020. We don't go into town at all, which means we don't have any help. We do our own work. Oh. And yeah, so this is it. It's been amazing. But you were asking more about the space, Siddharth. So to answer that, when we never have had an architect. So everything is just, Konarak draws something on a piece of paper. And there was a labor cooperative from the Concern for Working Children. So these are children who are children of masons, and they've grown up and they have their own cooperatives. And Konarak's sister is the director of CWC. So we've known these kids since they were little. And now Nagraj, who builds for us, he's much older. So he just he came here with a team of boys. They all camped on the land. and they dug out the mud from here. We made mud blocks from here, and that's how the buildings have developed. And we never had an idea like we'll have this huge institution, nothing. No. We had a watchman's cottage and we had our rehearsal space. So those were the first two things that were built. Slowly, we built this little cottage for ourselves. Now our daughter has a cottage. And now because the drama school students are coming here, we have a dining pavilion and some more, so it's been really in bits and bobs. But I can't see it differently anymore, Rustom. I agree with you. I think that you remember Anmol's book, Beyond the Proscenium, no?
Yeah.
You remember Anmol's book of essays?
Yeah.
And I really feel that the pandemic has shown us that proscenium, Nikhil, what you're saying is so emotional and so beautiful. To be in a space with others, to be in the space, it's perfect. But unfortunately, proscenium spaces have become really elitist spaces. Yeah. And the gatekeeping, it had become so hardened and not nice, So I stopped feeling good. That's why the digital space, where I disagree with you, is the digital space. While I too have aesthetic questions about Zoom, etc., but at least it opened it up to everybody. Two medical students could do a TikTok dance, and it's gone viral. It's this kind of freeing. There's a freedom in it. High art, low art, I don't care. If someone's going to come to it from an authentic space, I want to support that.
Yeah, right.
I invite you here because the dream has been to do a Beyond the Proscenium sort of festival here, where artists come and work with the rocks and the banyans and hire material from the village that is returned, so that there's no immovable pieces that are like these gigantic sets that will never be used again and costumes that will be put in dabbas. It's such a horrendous waste.
I have so many thoughts. I hope I can keep it together. So I'd love to first, I think, address the idea of access to performances. I think there is no doubt that the access and the and democratizing, not across just a small area, but around the world, access to the work that we're doing is I don't even have words to describe how amazing that is, to connect people and to be able to see so much work that's happening. But I think that there is another layer to the conversation of the democratizing prosceniums and the gatekeepers of prosceniums is a separate conversation. I think my space has been built around not having a proscenium, having 100% flexibility in the space, and working in a model that allows people to experiment, explore, and create new vocabularies with space. It is all about destabilizing those systems that I hate as much as you do. I hate the proscenium as much as I feel like you hate it.
I love the proscenium, but I hate that it's become so fossilized.
The way to unfossilize it is to allow more spaces for more people to play. And that's what, so I think that's a different conversation from the conversation of moving everything digital. And I think it's important to keep those separate because digital comes with questions of what is the form now. And I think there's a lot to be said and explored in that. There's a lot of excitement. There's a lot of innovation for sure. And there are a lot of questions.
Yeah. I think that's, you're making a good kind of separation. One of the things that struck me during the pandemic, when theatre shut down, the implicit assumption was that the existing spaces, proscenium spaces in particular, were not in a position to withstand the threat of the virus. They were almost branded as almost already infected spaces, which was, they were very vulnerable. Suddenly, all these big theaters in the West End and Broadway, they just had to shut down, because they just couldn't deal with basic questions relating to air circulation and the staggering of seats, because it's fixed. That's the economy. That if you don't sell 70% of the seats in a Broadway show, you're not going to be able to cover your costs. It's just so capital intensive and so obscene in terms of not being affordable any longer. We can forget about that. That's not the theatre space that we inhabit. But what did strike me and puzzled me, that for many years now, some very experimental theatre groups have been exploring site-specific spaces, found spaces, in all kinds of ways. They've been working in factories. They've been working in deserted buildings. They've been working in fields. They've been working all kinds of environmentals. Why was there no real impulse during those early months for these groups that have already explored alternative spaces to continue doing so? They didn't. They just capitulated. And there was a certain kind of surrender that we don't have a space, we can't do theater. And I think that's a problem.
Yeah.
So Kirtana, when you say that there is there are the rocks there are the fields there, maybe we have to start thinking geographically very differently. We have to really start thinking about the outdoors very differently. We have to be thinking about non-metropolitan spaces differently. Now, that may not be everybody's choice, Nikhil, because you may want to do the theater in the metropolis itself. I think it poses more challenges. So if I had to pose a question to you, Nikhil, that the Black Box Theatre indeed is very flexible. It's a beautiful space. But in today's pandemic climate, how would you deal with something as concrete? And here I would ask Siddharth to pitch in. How do you deal with air circulation in a black box? Because a black box, by definition, is enclosed, So how do you find ways of making the air move or just making it more breathable, Because that's one of the problems of any black box. It's too, you kind of, it has to be very well air conditioned. Otherwise you feel suffocated. But that's not the case, Kirtana, if you're in an open air space. It may be sticky or you may be perspiring and you may be doing all this, but it's not dangerous, you have to find another ergonomic relationship to where you're sitting, etc. But I'm just wondering, have you thought about that in terms of the black box? What have been some of your strategic, choices?
We're so lost at this present moment because we don't think we can open right now until it is safe for a certain amount of people to be indoors. So that's particular to this space. Of course, I believe in, and I would love that artists around India start exploring site-specific spaces, outdoor spaces. I think that's definitely the next arena where we can safely play and safely perform, and I think we have to do it.
What I'm anticipating is that there might be a move towards courtyards now.
Yes.
Even if you're talking about a metropolitan area, there might be a search for courtyards. Of course, Delhi is blessed with a lot of open spaces, and probably you could use those. But I think the courtyard is going to become a very, very important space now. When I started looking at this question which you raised through your lectures, I started wondering, why is it that Kutambulams, why are they semi-open spaces? They're not enclosed buildings. And of course, your amphitheaters were open to air. So it's not just about technology. It's not just about that they knew that, or the forms of cultural practice that they followed allowed them that. I think there might have been a question of pandemic or epidemic or some kind of airborne diseases which they were kind of also trying to address. Of course, I don't have evidence for this. I will be looking up and finding out more about it. But yeah, I am kind of pushing this idea where the choice of using a street, a courtyard, a pavilion, or a mobile unit as their venue for this performance and engaging with public. Because the threshold space is going to become far more important than the performance space itself, given the scenario where we are still not out of the pandemic. So even if there is a relaxation of a lockdown or whatever, even if people are going out and they want to participate in some kind of performance or some event, they will still be wary about getting too close to people. That's where the threshold space becomes very important. You need a very large threshold space, and it has to be open to sky. I mean, yes. You can obviously put up a tent if you want to kind of avoid, but air conditioning it creates a lot more troubles than it solves.
Yes, it does.
In an auditorium, to create this fresh air circulation, they have something called a plenum, which is a basement below the seating. And they're talking about the entire auditorium floor having an 8 feet high plenum, which is in itself a floor. So can you imagine the capital intensity that this is going to take the
Absolutely.
venture into? I think Kirtana, it's really, I'm quite envious of the place in which you are, and how things have kind of panned out for you, and what you're talking about, not just in terms of architecture, but even in terms of performance. And it is echoing a lot of things that Rustom has raised in his lectures about uh, the form of theater, the idea of ecology, and most importantly, the idea of scale, because our cities have they're just exponentially growing out of size. It's not handleable. It's only a state, an abstract idea of a state which is going to clamp down a lockdown at 4 hours notice. That's the only way this can be managed. Not in terms of people and living beings.
I think above and beyond everything, the quality of the space, whether it's indoor, proscenium, black box, all of this for me it's material, and all of it's a means. But eventually what we really pedagogically have to look at is the impulse of the artist. Because when the lockdown happened, why did performance stop? See, that's why this is the one area in which Nikhil, this whole digital space, for me, that is semantics. Only if I'm talking about the impulse of the artist. Because if the impulse of the artist is to create something and to express something, we should not be stopping. We should
No.
be carrying on willy-nilly with whatever means we have at hand. So that's my first. I mean, I feel those are the different conversations. It's not whether it's digital or black box. For me, those actually are, I don't know, I may be wrong, but I'm speaking as a person who works with young people, with teenagers. And I know for them that the digital space has been their stage for the last 10 to 15 years. It's not a new avenue for them. This is where they performed. This is where they've been worn costume. This is where they've had avatars. This is where they've explored their sexuality in this space. So that's why for me, it's not really, those two are not separate. The question for me is always a pedagogical one, which is why are so many people in the theater today? Like you look at India, we have a lot of people, a lot of young people are attracted to being in the theater. But pedagogically, have we missed the woods for the trees? Pedagogically, are we not addressing the fundamental question, which is, why do I make theater? We're still performatively talking about, like, I'm going to perform, I'm going to learn these skills, I'll do coloring, I'll do this, I'll do that. Why the heck do you want to do any of that? What is it you wish to communicate to me? So I feel that is it's another question. So that's one thing. And the other about form. See, this is another thing. I think form is always, it's malleable. It's always emerging. It's always changing. It's always restructuring itself. So of course, Zoom, we've been in it for, 18 months or 2 years or something, really. It's too new. It's too new. And it's an emerging form. The other day I was in a webinar on screen dance, which was something it was a practice which is very, very new to me. And then when I got into it, it was so interesting because the form is entirely technologically driven. And the whole thing is so digital dependent. But they're creating a form. And now in India, they're trying to see, like, is it too early to offer a pedagogy? Is it too early to develop a curriculum? I say yes, it's far too early. Because right now we have like kids exploring TikTok and Twitter and this and that, including Grindr, Bumble, Tinder, all of it in so many ways. Allow it to be, and we should keep our ears to the ground and see what's happening. The minute I get worried, as soon as I express a form, it becomes ossified. It becomes sort of too solid. So I'm off this is my personal feeling, that I just feel like, let it all be, let it all happen. And of course, there'll be a lot of muck that will throw itself up. What we can do in the meanwhile is hone our critical skills, hone our sense of history and, the long swords, the long continuum.
I just want to prod you a little more, Kirtana, because I'm not familiar with theater pedagogy at all. But as far as architecture or design is concerned, the concern always is job creation or placements or vocational training of sorts. That's where they're talking about the basic minimum or skill building and so on and so forth. And fair enough, everybody wants critical thinkers and creative architects, but it's okay if you don't have that kind of a thing. So my question would be in terms of how do theatre schools deal with this thing when they're talking about bringing in a new pedagogy? Are they actually talking about the creative urge, spirit, or are they talking about what does this do in the market? Is there a market for this thing?
Historically in India, there have been different strata, right? Like, I mean, first there was independence and there was roots theatre, and then there was NSD, Sangeet Natak Academy, all of this. But one thing that they have overemphasized have been skills and not intention. And right now, we don't have a job market. Right now, no amount of NSD is going to feed. The job market is OTT now. The people who are going to drama school now are also keeping one eye on OTT. The other thing is the whole productivity, the philosophy of productivity is now pretty much, it's old. We have to be looking at the philosophy of consumption, or the lack of consumption thereof, or the philosophy of compassion, the philosophy of empathy. This is what we have to bring back to the trade. So what you're talking about earlier, job placement, that's no more our issue. In theatre, that is really not our issue today. It's not. When people tell me like, oh, but then how do they earn a living? I don't believe this, because if you're hardworking enough, you will earn a living. I know this. And for me, I had no support. I earned a living. So you will earn a living. That's not your problem. Your problem is, why do you make theatre? This you should answer.